Welcome back if you've been here before, and thanks for coming along. If you've just dropped in on this video, I'm running through my CD collection, advocating for a physical collection. So, you know, the actual physical media and why you would have it. That's in the earlier videos. I might do a review soon and just run over some of what I've talked about. But I'm up to the M's, and it's quite a big section, so I'll try and move reasonably quickly through them. And I'm not really reviewing each thing individually, of course. I'm just trying to point out what I think are standouts in my CD collection in the alternative indie to start with. So M. Ward is an interesting singer-songwriter. So he's got that ability to really cut through with his voice and his lyrics. A lot of it's acoustic guitar driven, but there is other instrumentation in there. It's not terribly stripped back, but it is beautiful. This was the one I got first, which is a Transfiguration of Vincent. It's not about Vincent van Gogh, although I think there is something that almost hints at that. I'm just trying to think, because I feel there was something about Starry Night in there. But there is someone called Vincent O'Brien, so I'm not sure who that is, but that's one of the songs. So I'm thinking that's the Vincent he's singing about. I've seen him live and he was amazing. And the other one that I've got is Transistor Radio, and that's equally good. So I often buy more than one album by somebody if I like them. There's a third one that I was thinking of getting that I haven't got yet, but M. Ward is certainly worth checking out if you like sort of more stripped back acoustic music, if you're really into lyrics and storytelling and a unique voice. It really stands out. He's got a really nice sort of comfortable warm voice that I think really delivers his songwriting. Now, Mark Kozelek is somebody who, I can't remember what band or bands that he's been in, but this is a solo project from him. It's called What's Next to the Moon, and it's a bunch of AC/DC covers, which is really interesting. Because they're not the big hits. I think the only one that I was really familiar with is If You Want Blood, Up to My Neck in You, and then there's a bunch of other ones that they're not the big AC/DC hits. So there's no You Shook Me All Night Long or Back in Black or anything like that. Because what he's done is he's really gone back to the bluesy roots of AC/DC. So if you don't know, as much as AC/DC is hard rock, they do have a sort of a blues, what would you call it, DNA in the music. And of course, this is very stripped back. This is just his voice and I think largely guitar, acoustic guitar, I believe. I haven't listened to it for a while, but it's very beautiful and it sort of puts a new light on AC/DC lyricism, because it's the lyrics of Angus and Malcolm Young. He tributes Young and Scott. So there's all the members that possibly have been writing for AC/DC that he's acknowledging there. And they're quite beautiful songs when they're actually presented quite clearly with the lyrics sort of at the forefront, with the singing at the forefront, as opposed to the usual raucous sound. That's not to say AC/DC doesn't sometimes, wind it down and play something like Ride On in a way that is very, bluesy and straightforward. But he's done that with a bunch of their songs. And so it's a really interesting project. Now, I was previously showing the digipacks first and then moving to the jewel cases, but I seem to be sort of swapping back and forth. So I'm going to jump back to the jewel case CDs. And this is the Magic Numbers. And this is just like really fun, upbeat summertime music. And they did cross over into pop, into the sort of the mainstream. They got a lot of attention, and some of it not invited, because they were all quite large people. And they keep getting asked about their weight, which is ridiculous. Interviewers will do this. They'll say, you're all, I don't know how they broached it, but I think they got sick of being basically asked why, I don't know what they were asking, why are you fat? Well, for fat people, you're pretty good. What's going on? Ridiculous, right? And I guess they were one of those sort of fireworks bands, and I'll mention them occasionally when I have an album by what was perhaps a fireworks band, which were ones that just shot up, blew up all over the place and then disappeared. So the Magic Numbers kind of disappeared. But they weren't one-hit wonders. This is a very strong album. And this is their self-titled album, and I think they followed up with another pretty good album. Aside from people insisting to ask them about their obesity, because they were very active on stage. I saw them live, and they were incredible. They were really engaging. They moved around. They were just really vibrant, active, upbeat. Such a ridiculous thing. It just goes to show. I mean, I'm sorry I even brought it up, but if you go and look at interviews with them, sometimes they got those questions. Other than that, this album does suffer from the loudness wars. So this sort of must have come out around the time of the iPhone, maybe not iPhone, but iPods, where a lot of the music was produced to be played through earbuds, so not really being played through decent hi-fi systems, and everything was pushed up to the front. And so it kind of made things muddy. It's not that bad. It's one of the only CDs I've got that suffers from the loudness wars. There's some that have been sort of marked out as like, these are terrible albums because they just overdid it. And not in a sort of a wall of sound, Phil Spector sort of a way. It was just designed to be loud enough to be heard within earbuds or kind of crappy systems, to be honest. And so if you play them on a decent system, you sort of heard the muddiness. And that's an interesting conversation to sort of investigate and look at, that when how much the iPod and Apple sort of changed the way music was produced. But a good album, a solid album, The Magic Numbers. And now I want to move on to, I've got a couple of mics. There's Mike Snow and Mike Watt. Mike Watt, this is a sort of a guest album, a sort of a who's who of the early 90s, I guess. If I read through the names, we've got the likes of Dave Grohl, we've got Flea, there's Jay Mascis, there's, Thurston Moore, there's Kathleen Hanna from Bikini Kill. It just goes on and on. Evan Dando, Pat Smear. There's probably, some of these names I recognise, some I don't. Henry Rollins. Now, Mike Watt, he was the bassist for Minutemen, and they were an early sort of 80s punk band from the States. Once they broke up, he sort of went off and did his own projects, and this was one of them, I think, after they broke up. And it was sort of driven by him, but obviously with those different musicians, each sort of taking a track, there's the list of contributors and how and the different songs. It's varied in terms of what you hear. Eddie Vedder's in there, so it's a real mixed bag. It didn't get reviewed that well when it first came out, but it's considered pretty legendary now, and so worth trying to find a copy of Mike Watt. And what is it? It's called Ball-Hog or Tugboat. I don't know if those are wrestling moves. There's sort of like a wrestling aesthetic on it. So it's really good. The one I like, the standout track for me, is Against the 70s. And that's Eddie Vedder singing a song about just young people being warned against the baby boomer generation. And I guess you'd call it the 60s and 70s, but that kind of aesthetic, and just say that, young people can't just sort of look back to the nostalgia of the boomers, but actually, just be warned. You can't live in the 70s. Move on. We've got other problems now, not sort of what the boomers were banging on about in the 1970s and how much they brag about their music back then. So it's got political tracks in there. It's got a really interesting recording at some point further on in it. It's from that woman that Kathleen Hanna from Bikini Kill. There's a voice message which is really funny. And look that up too to find out what that's all about. Mike Snow. So there's two I's in Mike Snow. And somewhere at the beginning, the very first one, I talked about Amazon, which is a Swedish band. Mike Snow is from Sweden. Mike Snow, members of Mike Snow are in Amazon. The track that stood out for me on this album, and I think self-titled, Mike Snow, is Animal. It's the first one. Burial is very good too, and Sylvia. Actually, the first three tracks are good. It gets a bit weird further on. A Horse Is Not a Home is a strange one. Just the song title alone, but even, you know, the refrain, oh, a horse is not a home, is just bizarre. I don't know if that's lost in translation, something like that. It's all in English. There's no Swedish singing in here, but they're poppy tracks. They're really upbeat, poppy tracks. So well worth investigating Mike Snow. That Animal track is really worth hearing. Now, what else? Okay, there's a lot going on here. I'm trying to do it all in one take. Morgan Delt is amazing. I really enjoy this album. It's kind of garage rock psychedelica. It really does hark back to the 60s psychedelica. After talking about Eddie Vedder and Mike Watt's song Against the 70s, this one goes straight back to the psychedelic, I would say 60s and 70s actually. And it's quite distortion driven, so I guess there's that garagey element, that kind of lo-fi element to it. But the tracks are beautiful. They're really cool. I Don't Want to See What's Happening Outside is one of the tracks. It's called Phase Zero, but obviously look in the description and I'll list. I love the cover too, by the way. There's one other album that I might get. I haven't got it, but it's not as good as this one. So if you're looking for a Morgan Delt album, and who isn't, this is the one to get. And how did I come across it? Really interesting story. Well, let's see if it's interesting. I used to listen to Bill Burr's Monday morning podcast, and at the end of his podcast, there'd just be some songs would play. And I don't know whether it was something he did or whether it was somebody that worked with him within his sort of podcast studio, what have you. But the mix was always very interesting. And then that song came up. And one of my favourite songs is actually Some Sunsick Day. But I Don't Want to See What's Happening Outside was the track that I heard at the end of this podcast. And I just heard it, and I don't know whether one of the lyrics sort of stuck in my head, and it must have been the refrain of the title. And I looked it up and I managed to find it. It was one of those, I had to do some research, I had to do some digging about, because I sort of heard it and then it just stuck with me and I had to find out who it was. And so that was a strange introduction to Morgan Delt, was courtesy of Bill Burr's Monday morning podcast. So yeah, that's an awesome album. That's a highly recommended, by the way. I can't get enough of this one. I'm going to jump back to the 90s, early 90s again with Morphine. Cure for Pain. So guess what they're singing about? Now this is interesting. This is unusual in as much as it's full of saxophone. And there's a 2-string slide bass. I've never heard, I have no idea what that is. So it's got a real, when there's the baritone saxophone along with that bass, and of course the lead singer's voice is kind of a baritone, sort of deeper quality. It's quite a rich, deep, bluesy feel to it. But the rhythm, a lot of it, some of it's like quite sort of low key, and there's some guitar that comes in, I think some banjo as well, maybe. There's a couple of tracks that are really quite different, but the majority of them have the saxophone and have that bass and have that voice, and so that there's a funk to it, but there's a deep bluesy rumble to it as well. So unusual. So check out Morphine. They did have some hits. They Buena was, I think, that got some radio play, and Candy, I remember hearing that before I got this album. And Cure for Pain is the title track. But it's a really good album. Well, if you don't like saxophone outside of jazz, and I'm thinking more of a sort of Lost Boys and the use of the saxophone in that title track to that movie, then you may not really like Morphine. But it's an interesting sort of concept to have a lot of saxophone. My Bloody Valentine. Now this is probably considered one of those classic alternative indie albums that you must have. It's what is it? It's lo-fi. You can just look it up and you can listen to it yourself. You don't need me to describe it. It is sort of shoegaze. It's got a lot of feedback and a lot of sort of dirge, a lot of instrumental, very guitar driven. It's beautiful though. It's called Loveless. I don't have any other My Bloody Valentine albums, so I would say this is probably at the top of the list. but there will be others you may, if you like it, and I do like it, you can go and look it up. But don't feel you have to get more, I almost said Morphine, My Bloody Valentine, because it's sort of expected in an alternative indie collection. There's certain albums that people would say, have you not heard of My Bloody Valentine? They're one of those bands from the 90s that were just, in the underground sort of alternative scene, they were just huge. Sort of like Jesus and the Mary Chain and people like that. But it is a good album. It's really lush in terms of just being in your face but not loud. I don't know how to describe it. It's beautiful. Just check it out. And I would say, I'll just run with everybody else's opinion. It is one to have. If you've got an alternative indie collection, you should have My Bloody Valentine. Loveless there, I said it. Last one. It feels like an effort doing this in one take, but honestly, I haven't got to editing things yet. I'll get there in the end. But sometimes it's just nice to have a stream of consciousness, just get it all out there. And there's some risk to that, of course. My Morning Jacket. Now, I heard this some time ago, long time ago actually, in the late 90s, early 2000s. Somebody played me some My Morning Jacket, and I never bought it back then. I thought it was interesting. I liked it. I can't read the name because when you put purple on black, it becomes very hard to read. So I'm trying to, what is this one called? Oh, just look down in the description. I really can't remember what the title of this one is. But it's very good. I really like it. And I ended up getting 2 albums. So this is one of them. And then this is the other one. This one I can read. It's called It Still Moves. And I think this is a little bit different to the standard one because this is a 2 CD set. And it's sort of previous unreleased bonus material. So I bought the second hand. So, sometimes it's good to wait because if I had bought the original album, I wouldn't, I don't always feel compelled to buy it again just because it's got, it's been remastered. This one's been remastered and they've created a bonus disc just to seduce you. I've mentioned that before. So I happened to get this because it was on sale and it was easy to get second hand, pretty good condition. And it's beautiful. Again, it falls a little bit into that alt country, Americana sound, but a lot more experimental than that. So I don't want to mislead you. Check out My Morning Jacket. They do fall into alt country, I think, alongside people like Wilco and Bonnie Prince Billy, sort of contemporary take on country music. But they obviously do a lot more with it in terms of the kind of instruments they use. And you will find guitar and some slide guitar and banjo, I'm sure. I'll just say what I would think. Fiddle. I got that wrong. Trying to think of fiddle and not violin. Same idea, same thing. But you get this lush orchestration instrumentation in some of these albums, and that's sort of part of the alt country thing to do, is to just sort of overload it really. And I mean that it gives you a sense of overload, and that's obviously this isn't a live album, but it does give you sort of live album images. Can you see that? Yeah. So yeah, My Morning Jacket, definitely worth checking out. I'd probably get another album, but the rule of 3 doesn't seem to apply here, other than I would say you should get Morgan Delt, Phase 0, and My Bloody Valentine, Loveless for the M's. But check out any of these, and feel free to share with me what you think should be in my M collection, alternative indie, or what you like within alternative indie in the M section. But that's it. So we got there. And keep watching, subscribe, all of that. We're up to the ends next. We're nearly halfway. Well, we are halfway now. And I may do a sort of catch-up video in between, and then we'll get into the second half. So thanks for watching. Keep coming back. I really appreciate it. And at some point, I'll have to do editing so that I can get rid of those moments where I do some of that train of thought stuff. So anyway, take care. See you soon.